Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, March 18th. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem studio with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here, as always.
I am always glad to speak with you, and we have a lot to talk about after the assassination of Ali Larijani yesterday in Iran. How can the regime recover from this? Can it continue? How will it continue? Lazar will fill us in. We're also going to discuss blowback that U.S. President Donald Trump is facing from allies and from within his own MAGA movement. So all of this and more when we're back. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem office with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Overnight, Iran sent barrages of missiles in retaliation for the assassination of both Ali Larijani and the head of the Basij. 2 in Ramat Gan were killed, dozens injured and brought to hospital, and much property was destroyed. Lazar, let's drill into Iran after Ali Larijani. But first of all, just tell us, broad strokes, who was he to the regime?
Absolutely. So he comes from one of the 2 major prominent political families in Iran, the other one being Khamenei, of course. He has served in a number of senior positions. He was the head of the National Security Council about 20 years ago, and he was reappointed in August. He was someone who led the recent negotiations, or at least set the policy for the recent nuclear negotiations with the U.S. I think what is important to remember about Larijani is that he was personally chosen by the Supreme Leader, recently deceased Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, as his deputy. He was the one who was supposed to take the revolution forward. And he was believed to have been the person who has been basically running the war as much as anyone has been, but coordinating between the many different security organizations in Iran since Khamenei's death. So if I was going to sum it up, I would say that there is nobody who was more important to the regime and to the war effort than Ali Larijani until he was killed 2 nights ago.
We hear talk of him as this kind of bridge between the military and the supreme leadership. And without this bridge, how do you see the regime continuing?
Sure. So I think there's no question that the regime will continue, right? They've suffered a lot of very significant assassinations, both in June and especially now. Losing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, of course, was the biggest one, but there's been a whole host of dozens of senior leaders that have been taken out since then. So in terms of regime continuity, it's not cracking now. It's not going to crack and come apart unless there's some sort of internal break, which we're not seeing signs of, or if the Iranian people rise up, which we're also not seeing signs of yet. But you can understand why not. There's still an active war going on. So it remains too early to determine whether that will happen. In terms of who is going to replace him, first of all, as I was saying, this is not a lone assassination. The whole leadership level of the most important body inside of Iran, which is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is dead. Most of the second level is dead. So now you're stuck with kind of the third tier who would seem to be running things as much as anyone is running things. The regime is still putting forth a coherent military response. It doesn't mean it's that coordinated. It's basically fire at everybody. That's not something that has to be coordinated from above. Iran themselves say that local commanders are empowered to fire. So it doesn't seem like there's any great thought behind, the firing, but Israel is being hit and Gulf states continue to be hit as well. And then, of course, there's the threats around the Strait of Hormuz, which continue to come out. So all that will continue. But this is just part of a process of the regime's leadership and experience coming apart. And then you have to ask yourself what comes next. It would seem that whereas the Islamic Republic is built to have the power in the hands of clerics, what has happened, especially over the past decade, but even a little bit longer, but especially now, is that the military side, the IRGC, is becoming the most powerful body in Iran, more than the clerics. And there's also the question we have to ask is, there's officially a supreme leader, Moshtaba Khamenei, who's Ali Khamenei's son. We haven't seen him. We haven't heard him. Everyone believes that he's injured. No one knows how much. The regime released some weak written statement, but that doesn't prove anything. So it's not clear who is in charge. But even if Khamenei, the son, is running things, he is very much an IRGC person. So if we're going to look, if this regime survives moving forward for the next few years, it'll be IRGC dominated, with all the implications of having such a hardline armed organization running the country.
Let's explain a little bit more to me what the differences are between IRGC, the Basij, and also the Ayatollahs. Meaning, are they all talking the same talk? Is it the same ideology between all three of these organizations?
Well, they all ascribe to the ideology of the Islamic Republic, that it is supposed to be run by a jurist, so a religious figure who decides what the government policy is going to be. Now, there's this very complex web where there are indeed some sort of elections for the Majlis, for the parliament. It's really a toothless body. There's elections for the president, Gan, but there are bodies that are elected or selected by the supreme leader, who determine who can run and make sure that nobody who is actually going to upend the system gets in. It's the only country in the world, as far as I know, where the president doesn't have control over the armed forces. Okay, so that is also in any presidential system who doesn't have control over the armed forces.
I mean, our president doesn't as well.
Right. So he's the head of state. He's not the head of government. So in any presidential system, let's say the U.S., obviously he's the commander-in-chief. So the commander-in-chief there is the supreme leader. And then he has the Assembly of Experts, the Council of Guardians, to make sure that his will throughout the government is happening. So he has these 2,000 representatives throughout the government. There is a clerical establishment. They're the ones who select the next supreme leader, generally are in line, but there's also some differences there. You have some more pragmatists and some more extremist ones. And within the government officials, the elected officials and people like foreign ministers and such, there is also different camps. There are some that think the future of the regime depends on opening its relations with the West and trading with the West, and some who see whatever happens, the West is trying to destroy the Islamic Republic, and therefore it doesn't need them, and it should just trade with countries like Russia and China and develop everything itself. So there are certainly internal struggles. I don't think that's going to be the internal struggle moving forward. I think it'll be within the IRGC, since it is so obviously the dominant power, and there could well be factions within the IRGC that are struggling for power, not necessarily over ideology, but for a desire to lead and be the most influential faction in the country.
So both U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had basically said, hi, people of Iran, we are raising the ground so that you can rise up. And in this raising of the ground, we're talking about the assassinations of all sorts of different figures. But we have not seen assassinations of political leadership. So talk about this differentiation.
Sure. So Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei obviously had a very significant political role, but he was also the head of the IRGC in the military. So it's somewhat different. In general, in wars, you stay away from taking out political leadership. So generally, presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers are not killed in wars. And you can even go back to, all-out wars like in World War II, which that didn't happen. Now, there's different theories why it doesn't happen. Some say, okay, so if I'm a president, if I take out the other president, it's going to threaten me. But also the idea that you need people in place to negotiate an end to wars and to negotiate what's going to happen afterward. So far, Israel and the U.S. have indeed, as you said, not gone after Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, even though he's quite the focal and he's interviewing in English. So that they have not gone after him. And again, he doesn't have any military role, so they very well might not. Then he's not key to the survival of the regime. And also Pezeshkian, they haven't touched. Israel certainly sees this as an existential war and needs the regime to collapse at some point. The question is, and I think they will go after anyone that will lead to that. The question is whether they think that Pezeshkian and Araghchi are key to regime survival. I really don't think so. And they don't seem especially afraid. They go out, they're in studios, they're on the street. So it seems like they understand that they are not targets right now either.
Though, of course, Ali Larijani was out in the streets on Friday on Al-Quds Day celebrating or at least calling for the demise of Israel on Friday, and we saw his end. But let's circle back to the president of Iran for one more second. And U.S. President Donald Trump has said before that he would like to see somebody from within Iran rise up and take control of the country. Do you see any kind of scenario where this Kurdish Iranian could be that person?
Well, no, because he doesn't have any real power in the government. You can see he's not deciding what's happening. If you remember, he was the one that issued this apology to the Gulf states, and obviously Iran has continued to strike them. So he's not someone who's deciding what's happening. It's a weak presidency anyway in that country. So,
but wouldn't that serve U.S. President Donald Trump's interests to have a weak figurehead?
well, absolutely. But the question is whether that would mean anything within Iran. If you look, this is the Venezuela model, right? Where you have Maduro's deputy who was the number 2 in the regime, and the U.S. Had enough ability to threaten the regime and to get that regime that still remains to cooperate. That is not the case in Iran. There's not evidence that much of the regime would cooperate, and Pezeshkian is certainly not the people to impose that on the regime. If at some point there's enough figures in the regime that say, okay, we want to survive, we want some element of the regime to survive, but we're willing to give up the nuclear program, our ballistic missiles, proxy networks, and stop being a military threat to everybody and just worry about keeping this Shia theocracy in place, then maybe you could see that. I think Trump is definitely leaving the door open to that possibility.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for the Iranian people to rise up, and there's actually a date on the table. There's a holiday that begins on Friday, the Persian New Year, Nowruz, I believe it's called. Nowruz. And do you see any kind of signs that this timeline could be playing out?
So he's put out this video late last night, and it's this pre-Nowruz ancient Zoroastrian holiday, the Festival of Fire. And that is something that, not surprisingly, this Shiite theocracy doesn't like people to go out and celebrate because it's pagan. Therefore, when people go out and celebrate it, it often turned into anti-regime protests. So I think with some cleverness, Israel tried to get people to go out and celebrate that and said, we're watching from above. Don't worry about it. We have your back, basically. It didn't happen. We didn't see people go out. And you can understand, even these people, obviously, much of the country hates the regime, but when you have bombs falling all over the place, they'd rather stay home. So we haven't seen it yet. We'll see if people, Nowruz is such an important holiday for the Iranians, also for the Kurds. It would be nice to see people go out, and spend time with their families and do their picnics. And that could well embolden people to say, we can go out again, we can live our lives, we can taste freedom a little bit. And let's see if that leads to something. It's something to keep an eye on. But I think as long as there are bombs falling, all across the country, it's less likely that will happen.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem studio with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Lazar, let's now talk about some blowback that U.S. President Donald Trump is experiencing. Let's start with the NATO allies that he called on to help protect the Strait of Hormuz. So what are we hearing from Germany and France and countries of this nature?
Sure. There's no commitment to do anything yet. Those countries like France and the UK are very proud of what they're doing on the defensive front. So they are flying around, and they're part of the effort in the Gulf to shoot down drones and the like. At the same time, even though there's no NATO consensus on this yet, there are countries that say that they're open to it. I sat with Estonia's foreign minister yesterday, who's in Israel, and he said, we're open to talking about it. Not a big country, but we do have some capabilities. I think the big concern right now for some of those countries that are open to it and have a history of working closely with the U.S. Militarily, like Estonia, is that they don't understand the scope of the mission and the aims and what exactly it would entail. So I wouldn't say that this is a closed door yet. The EU mission, so there's the SP's mission in the Red Sea. They said that they're, at this point, there's not consensus to expand it, and I don't expect that there will be. Some countries are for it, but when you have countries, many of these same countries that have given Israel problems in the EU, you need consensus to do things in foreign policy there. So I don't expect that to expand. So you might get individual countries, but the ideal for the U.S. would be the NATO alliance. Again, this is a pretty defensive effort, convoys and the like, perhaps, of ships. It's something that that the world is affected by. So, the more time goes by, you could actually see this start to take place.
We also hear calls from Trump to China, for example, to help out because 20% of the world's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz, but I think it's something like 70 or 80% of China's energy needs. But what are we hearing from China?
I don't think China's gonna help the U.S. in this military. They see it as a military adventure. They would like nothing more. First of all, Iran's a key ally, like you said, with their energy, so they need the regime to survive. And there's nothing they want to do that would strengthen the U.S. position in the Middle East. They were happy to see under Obama and Trump, the first term, move out of the Middle East as much as possible. Now that they're seeing a very significant return by Donald Trump to the Middle East, they don't want to make that easy for them. They'd love to see the U.S. waste interceptors and missiles that would be used in a coming war potentially with China and burn through those. They would love to see domestic unrest and political unrest in the U.S. So they want to do nothing that will make this easier for the U.S. and for Trump.
Okay, what about India? And just prior to the war, just days ahead of the war, we had a state visit from Modi, and we're hearing reports that India is negotiating privately with Iran in order to get its energy needs fulfilled.
Yeah, so India, biggest country in the world, doesn't have enough oil to power that economy. So it is worrying about itself first, but obviously it's a key member of the U.S. alliance in the region. So I think it will not go over well with Trump if they indeed undercut U.S. efforts to create an alliance. It's something to keep an eye on. India has a significant maybe. But I would put most of my hope on just the U.S. Navy alone, and then on a NATO alliance, which is formal. And really, you talk to European officials, listen, their big threat is the Russian threat. And they are very much aware that Russia has been using Iranian drones in its attacks on Ukraine. And they very much see that as a common threat. So I think it's much more likely to come from some European countries, or at least through NATO, than countries in Asia.
Okay, now finally, let's turn to the U.S. and blowback that Trump is experiencing from within his own MAGA movement. And we heard yesterday about the dramatic resignation of Joe Kent. First of all, tell us who he is.
Sure. Joe Kent is he's a Ranger veteran. He's a U.S. military veteran. He ran for the U.S. House twice unsuccessfully. In general, he's a Republican, obviously, but in general, he has had a pattern of being interviewed by, talking to, associating with people on the far right / the anti-Semitic right. So our old friend Nick Fuentes, he later avowed it, but he spoke to him. He also spoke to another neo-Nazi and is endorsed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, or he endorsed her, I believe. So all of these figures on the fringe of the Republican Party that inevitably, wade or jump into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, he's right along that edge. So you had like the left wing who was warning against him, and people that on Trump's side said that they were kind of exaggerating things, and so he had to kind of keep quiet about that, disavow some of those things, and he's kept quiet. He hasn't had that prominent a role. He was head of the National Counterterrorism Center. There are reports that he had a meeting with the kind of more isolationist wing of the White House before resigning. So that was with Vance, and that was with Tulsi Gabbard. Those would be people who would be more sympathetic with him about opposing this war. But they certainly didn't stop him, and they haven't said anything about it. But what I think this shows is that the MAGA movement, I don't think it's split within the MAGA movement. I think there's people who are outside of the MAGA movement. So from Tucker Carlson and even croupier to Candace Owens, they're outside the MAGA movement. They're not. They're going to support Trump less and less, and you see that they are focusing more and more on Jews and Israel. And that's basically what that movement has become. I think I would hope to see more mainstream figures in the Republican Party and around Trump disavow them as energetically as possible. There was a conservative conference, I think it was National Review Against Anti-Semitism a couple weeks ago, calling out these figures. But I think you can see in Trump's mind and in the White House, it's the pro-Israel side, which is ascendant, which is dominant. You see Caroline Leavitt retweeting Ben Shapiro, who the anti-Semitic right hates, Mark Levin and those types. So I think it's very clear that the pro-Israel wing of the MAGA movement absolutely is the one that Trump is affiliating with. And that's good for figures like Marco Rubio, that was obviously been a very good friend to Israel and continues to be. Question is, what does this mean for Vance? He's been quiet of late. Obviously, his position is he's been supporting the war, but the question is what it means for him as he maneuvers himself to probably run in 2028, and what does it mean for the anti-Semitic wing of the Republican Party, which has been, or conservatives, the anti-Semitic wing of conservative movement. I don't know if they're going to stay in the Republican Party, which has been very vocal and very effective on social media.
Right, because one of Joe Kent's allegations is essentially that Israel is dragging the U.S. into the war, and this is something we've heard from day one, and he says it very clearly in his resignation letter. So having it stated so on black and white from somebody who has been so aligned with Trump and the MAGA movement and who is resigning, it seems to me a pretty pivotal moment in terms of the blowback for Trump. And so I mean, we need to see what the ripple effect is. And as you said, it can only strengthen people such as Marco Rubio, who are pro-Israel. But do you see some kind of, I mean, you said you don't see a splinter in the MAGA movement, but couldn't this be the first sign of one?
No, because this is the latest in a pattern where you have people who, listen, you don't think that that Israel is controlling the U.S. unless you have these ideas about Jewish control of the world. Let's be honest. It's such a ridiculous idea. Israel couldn't even get little European countries not to recognize a Palestinian state, right? And every time Netanyahu and Trump meet, we see that Trump forces Netanyahu to do stuff on Gaza and things like that. So it's just preposterous that Israel, which has been stopped in all of its wars by the U.S., 73, 82, whatever it is, could get the U.S. to do anything, certainly not someone like Donald Trump, unless you believe that Jews kind of control the world, and AIPAC with its, money all over the place, and they're controlling U.S. policy. And if only the Jews didn't have influence over U.S. policy, we wouldn't be in the Middle East, and prices would be lower, and there would be unicorns and fairies all over the place, and there would be no crime, because it's the Jews, of course, that want unrestricted immigration. If you believe that stuff, then this is exactly the rhetoric that you would hear, and these are people like Joe Kent. I think it's clear, would fall in that camp. And I assume that he's going to become very outspoken now, and he's going to get battier and more clearly anti-Semitic. That's what I expect. There's a lot of people that appeals to. Thank God. The president has not shown that he wants to side with these people, and indeed, he's siding more with the sane part of the Republican Party, which is very firmly pro-Israel.
But it is a calculated move, meaning it's not something that he did out of passion. As you said, he took meetings, Joe Kent, before submitting his resignation.
I don't know what his calculations were, but I think this is clearly something that he believes. And who knows, he might be setting himself up for a run. But whenever you get for someone that's on the inside and obviously knows how these relationships work, to come out with something like, "Oh, Israel's controlling the U.S.," I think it's clear what his deeper motivations and where his deeper, and given his past as well, where how he sees the world and how he sees the pernicious Jewish influence. I'm sure that's very much what we're going to hear from him moving forward. If anyone listens to him, I hope they don't.
Right. I mean, that is the question. Essentially, it appears that he has an audience. This audience appears to be growing. So to me, it's not something that I can just say, poo-poo, it's because he's an anti-Semite. It is worrisome to me that somebody from within the administration has expressed these views and is resigning because he believes them firmly enough to give up this position.
It doesn't I mean, I'm very concerned about the anti-Semitic rate. Someone like Tucker Carlson is much more concerning to me than Joe Kent. Has the ear of the president, or at least he did. It's not clear whether that's going to continue. Certainly has the ear of people like J.D. Vance and Trump's kids. That's much more worrisome. And the fact that, people know that if they move into this anti-Semitic right, they're going to get millions and millions of podcast followers. That seems to have been Megyn Kelly's calculus as well. She's going to jump 2 feet in and start going with these conspiracy theories and this nonsense. And it's brought her a lot of viewers, obviously Candace Owens as well. So there is a concern there. But this particular case doesn't make me any more worried about it than I was.
Lazar, thank you as always for all of your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Yitzhak Ledeh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow. Shalom.